Welcome to Resume Well. Welcome to Resume Well. We are here today with our wonderful guest, Erica Weiderluht. Is that how I say your name? I was like, I should probably double check with her.
It's
before.
perfect. It's almost there. Weiderluht.
Oh, okay, cool.
You nailed it. Yeah.
All right. The founder of, believe it or not, We Are the Light. So I love that. Erica's journey began as an unexpected gift in 2013, and it really evolved from spiritual coaching into a really powerful focus on sex, love, and relationships. And I'm so excited because we've never had anybody on who really deals with like that little realm of taboo. So after confronting her own struggles with anxiety and self-doubt, she transformed her life and now passionately empowers others to embrace their worthiness, their pleasure, and their confidence. Erica's story is super inspiring, and it will help you discover how you can light up your own path to personal and professional fulfillment. So I'm super excited because obviously this sounds very like relationship-y, sexual, and all of that stuff. But the reason I really wanted to have you on was because you do a lot of like corporate talks and discuss how like that actually has a huge impact on like your professional life, which I think a lot of people it's like they're living two separate lives, right?
100%. Yeah, exactly. I love that I'm so grateful that you want to talk about that because rarely people I'm like, oh, by the way, a huge facet of my business is corporate talks. And some folks are like, that's okay. So I'm so grateful that you're like, wait, that's amazing. Like, let's talk about that because that's huge. It's so huge.
It's so huge. And it's nobody talks about it. And well, anyway, we'll get into it, but I like to start off, and I actually recorded an episode the other day and I was like, oh my God, I forgot to ask like my like first question that I ask every guest. And I was like, I can't forget to ask Erica because I just can't wait. I can't wait to hear your response. But when you're at like a dinner party or at even a networking thing or any kind of social thing where you're meeting new people, they don't know what you do. And inevitably, everybody always asks like, oh, hey, like, what do you do? How do you respond to that? What do you say?
Oh my God, that's the best question I've ever heard because it's honestly so true. I kind of have to tailor it. You know what I mean? Like I have to, sometimes it's not the vibe. So I tweak it, but often, I've become more comfortable just being like, well, this is just what it is. But often I say, I'm a confidence coach and I help folks with their sexual empowerment, dating, love, self-love. And again, if I can't have to go PG-13, I'm more like, it's confidence, it's self-love. If I could really go there, I'm like, it's sexual empowerment, it's dating, it's tantra. So it kind of like, it depends on the vibe, but okay. I have been more like forward of this is what it is, and over the years, I've been more like, come on, Erica, like, let's be, more transparent about what's going on,
Yeah. And if you do go like the whole, R-rated version, how do people generally respond to that? Like, do you see them kind of squirm or are they like, oh, that's really cool?
Oh, that's really cool. Like, usually I'm the one that's like, oh God, like, it's so funny. My teacher always used to say this. She's like, and she's really heavy into sexual empowerment. And she'd always say, do you think I chose this? Like, I don't want to go to dinner. Like she would say, I don't want to go to my daughter's PTA meetings and have to say like, or PTO meetings, whatever, and say, oh yeah, this is what I do. She's like, and I feel similar. It's like, I'm the one that's could be like a little weird about it. And people often, they might have a reaction. Then, 15 minutes later, they're like, can I tell you something? Like, this is always how it goes down. Like, I'll tell them. And then I'll like 5 minutes later, I'll find them in the bathroom. Like, okay, so let me corner you. Yes. I'm like, here we go. Like, I'm like, thank God I love it. But it's so cool because for me, I've had to work through my fears around it and my stories and conditioning around it. Most folks are like, thank God I'm dying to talk about this. Like, I'm desperate to talk about this. So it's actually been such a blessing. And then of course people have judgment and that's okay. Like, that's part of why I do the work is we do as a society hold so much judgment and so many stories. And so it's fabulous either way. It's just like, it's great. It's so much fun.
Yeah. Okay. So what did you want to be when you were a kid?
Oh, I love that. So, two things. When I was little, I wanted to be a detective, which is hilarious because I'm scared of my own shadow. We're so
Oh.
random. It was a phase. But since I was 8 years, it was a real quick phase. Since I was 8 years old, I want to be an actress. And I actually, anyone that kind of is a little bit familiar with my work, I also do acting as well. So it's a big part of my journey. So I wanted to do acting since I was 8. And then that's why with this business, I was like, no, 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 no. Like, again, how my teacher, I was like, no, 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 guys, like, no, no, universe. Like, I'm supposed to be an actress. What are we doing? Like, what is this? Like, this is not supposed to be happening. So acting has always been part of my life since I was a kid.
Nice. Yeah, that's so funny because when I was doing my research on you, I put in your name and you have a pretty, unique name. Yes. I don't think I've ever met another Weiderluht. And I had already had a Zoom with you, so I knew what you looked like. I went on your website and everything. And I think your IMDb came up or another website for acting came up. And I was like, is this the same person? And I was like, no, that's like such a specific name. And I was like, no, that looks like her. Like that's the same, but then we had a Zoom like way back in July and I was in this Airbnb, like sitting on the floor. And anyway, and I was like, no, that's her. So I was actually going to ask you about that because I also did acting. And I think a lot of actors, if you're listening, end up kind of like going off into different like offshoots of whatever another interest is, but they never really leave acting behind. It's always something like, it's like your first love, right?
Totally.
So I love that you own that. And you're like, I also wanted to do this and I still love it. And that's actually a good jumping off point because, acting, if you've ever done a play, even if you're like a professional actor, if you've ever done a school play, confidence is like 90% of it, right?
100%.
So how did acting inform this decision towards coaching? Like, can you talk a little bit about like,
yes,
I mean, that's like a very pointed question. And I usually like to keep it like more open-ended. Like, how did you get into your role? But how did that like bridge?
Yeah. Okay. Wait, I have to tell two stories because I think this is important. Yeah. So rolling, because I think you'll like this and it applies. So rolling back actually a few months ago, I had my PR agent pitch me for this story. And people are usually very receptive. Again, my business is kind of niche. And so people are usually like, yes. And the woman, from my understanding, was open. And then she found me and she was offended that I also do acting. She was like, she can't be that good of a life coach. And I am a very sensitive human. So I was like, and then I sat with it and I was like, wait, what? No, like this is quite literally what I teach my clients is that like we are allowed to be all the things. Like I want to, for me, this is my perspective on life. Like when my life is over, I want to look back and be like, I did it all. Like I lived my life. And so for many years, I really struggled with, I would just go back and forth. Should I do acting? Should I do coaching? Acting, coaching, acting, coaching. And for me, doing all of it is like a reclamation of how I want to live. Like that's my work embodied. Like I want to teach a movement class one day and then go to an audition next day. Like for me, that's Erica's authentic truth. So I say that because I had such shame, because we're taught like do one thing and do it right. And I was like, right. So I was like, wait, this is me. Like, this is how I want to live. So I say that because there's a lot of folks I hear, especially with career, they feel shame of, I want to do multiple things. I'm like, that's fabulous if that's your truth. So that's part one. Part two is for me, I feel like great actors. And I had a acting teacher. He was awesome, named Larry, and he was very spiritually based. Because, he was really wanted us to be present and in the moment and, hello, like that's so directly correlated to like meditation, being in your body, like that's so correlated to my work. And so for me, once I really got down the spiritual path and when I really started to prioritize this work, my acting was so much better. Like they were so, because I was like, I could really be present. I'm really in my body. First of all, I'm confident to go and do the things, but like, I'm really in my body. I'm really present. And my acting totally transformed, honestly.
Wow.
And also what's cool is, so from the acting part, so much better. From the business of acting part, so much better. Because before I was so, I wanted work. Who doesn't? Like I
Right.
love what I do, and who needs to be, I wanted to work. And so I was approaching acting from this like, give me
Like
desperate
scarcity.
energy. Yes, totally. So I'd go into agent meetings and like you just felt like it was like, ooh, it was a little desperado. And when I had
Mm-hmm.
this, I was like, it was just like, hey, I am great, or like I know, like I'm trying to find a
No,
more.
really
I
good.
know I'm really amazing. No, but like I know. Listen, I know I work hard. I know you're not going to regret working and being in collaboration with me. So it was just such a different energy. And I'd walk into agent meetings or walk into castings like, this is what I got, and people were like, thank God, like it was just such a different place of how sure I approach acting, but how I approach my life, quite honestly.
Yeah, there's almost this like with or without you energy, right? Where it's like, I'm going to be
Right.
doing it and like, I'm here now. So you can do it with me, or I'll just go to another audition and do it there. But
Right.
it's so true because I think what you were talking about with the spirituality and like meditate, the overlap between
Yes.
this is so crazy. So the overlap between meditation, I'm also a yoga teacher. So there are so many overlaps between performance, and that doesn't have to just be acting. I mean, this is like for if you want to bring it back to like corporate, like if you're doing any kind of presentation, which like, hello, everybody's doing that now, right?
Right.
Everybody has at least one of those in their life, but I have always told people there are these themes in your life that you kind of like keep going back to. And there's actually an exercise. I wasn't even going to talk about this, but there was this exercise that I have all of my clients do when they're like, I don't know what I want to do. I have all these like random skills and like, I need to pick one thing. And it's like, first of all, no. Second of all, let's see if there's anything that kind of like webs them together.
Yes.
And so for me anyway, like when I was doing this for myself, I was like, it all just comes back to just being present, like acting, being present in the moment, yoga, being present in the moment, even breath. Like I did a lot of singing. I'm not even that good at singing, but I just loved it. Right. It's all about breath control.
Right.
And it's so like it's like my Roman Empire. Every now and then I'll like think of that. And I'm like, isn't that so weird how everything's just, it's all connected. And so
it's true.
I love that. And I want to talk a little bit more about like the nitty gritty. So you were doing acting.
Yeah.
How did you transition into life coaching as opposed to like, I mean, I think as an objective person, I'd be like, well, if you want to do coaching, do acting coaching, right? Like you're an actor,
Right.
you want to do coaching, those kind of go together. So what was more attractive to you? No pun intended, attractive with towards like life coaching. And then how did that evolve into, sexual trauma coaching and confidence coaching under the umbrella of, sexuality?
Yeah, I love this. It's funny. For many years, not that many, but like kind of toyed with, should I do acting coaching? And I love it. Like I often have clients that are actors and they're like, can you help me with this? I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Like I love the business of acting. So like, I'm always down. But for me, my journey started, it's so funny because as you could tell, I'm a very hyperactive human. But I
Love
always
it.
had all over the place. And since I was 6, 8, again, similar to when I started acting, I would make my mom get VCR tapes of Rodney Yee. And I would, in my room, do yoga as like a 6-year-old, as a 7-year-old, as 8-year-old.
No way.
Which is crazy because as you can tell, my personality is wild. So I remember my dad would always be like, this doesn't make sense. I'm like, no, but it does. But so
it does.
It does. I'm like, that's perfect. So I always had my own, spiritual path, doing my thing in the background. And then about maybe 3 years, question mark, before I started my business, I had one of those dark night of the soul moments, years. I had friends pass away. I was struggling with a really dark eating disorder, going through a breakup, and my mom was diagnosed with cancer. So it was kind of like help, but like it was SOS. It was a year. And through actually, all the darkness and through my mom's cancer diagnosis, I got really into holistic health. And then I was like, oh, this is interesting. Oh, this is interesting. So I went from like Reiki training to Ayurveda. Like I just was bouncing just purely from a place of like, I'm interested. I want to give this back to her. So from a place of service. And then I landed in a coaching certificate again with no intent to do any of it for like, it was like, I'm doing this for my mom. And I love this. Like the spirituality thing is like, I'm just passionate about it. So like, it's a extracurricular. And then through that, I would have folks at my house like doing session, and I wouldn't call them that because I was so resistant, but like I do Reiki sessions. I would do sessions, but it was coaching sessions. I'd have people come over and be technically workshops. And that was going on in the background as I was auditioning and living my life. And so that's kind of how it started. It was more like the spiritual life coaching journey. And then I was doing that for many years. And I remember, this is such a weird story, but it's so distinct to me. So I was doing that for years, and I had this like beautiful Buddha picture, and it was like a red, it was red and it was on parchment. And I remember one day I looked up and I got this like intuitive hit that it was like, you're going to be doing something like more like sensual embodiment. And I was like tantra, and I was like, oh, I know, but do we have to, like, I remember being like, no, like I'm excited. Like I both was excited, and I also was like, oh no. So that's like, it's woo woo, but you know, I like to be a little witchy. So I was like, all right, whatever. When the time comes, the time comes. Cliff notes, the time came, and I thought, I'm not going to do anything with this. I'm going to keep my spiritual coaching practice. And then I fell in love with it. I mean, and as you know, especially with the sexuality, especially with dating, it is so it could be so spiritual. So it ties back all to the spiritual principles, and it's just a different way to get there. So I was like, oh, I love this. So that's kind of how, very resistant, but that's how I got there.
Did you find that before you had that kind of like intuitive hit, and by the way, the whole like purpose of the season 2 of Resume, so we're calling it Resume Well, is to like go into like the woo stuff, because
great, because I'm like,
no, that's like the whole thing is that like wellness and woo, they kind of like end up coming together, you know? Yeah. And like that's how they end up influencing our daily life, and people just don't want to either talk about it because it's not, you know, scientifically backed up enough for them, or they're just like ashamed of it because people will laugh at them. But we don't care here. So great.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love it. And my question was, did you feel like that kind of intuitive hit that you got then had you kind of focus on bringing in more like sexual based clients, and I mean sexual coaching based clients, or were they already coming to you? Like, did the coaching kind of already evolve that way, and then you got that hit, or was it kind of like random, but you were like, yeah?
That is such a good question. It's so funny. I've never thought of it, but now when I do, I'm like, oh my God, it did shift. Like it did that's so funny that like, then it started to be more like about love and like love coaching, or I'm going through a divorce, or I'm going through this. So the clients changed, but then also my training changed. So I obviously was still doing the business, but I was like, oh, for fun, quote unquote, of course, I'm going to do these trainings. I'm going to do this sexual empowerment training. I'm going to get certified in sex, love, and dating coaching, or relationship coaching, just for fun. And so I kept saying just for fun. And then it slowly started to infuse into my business.
Okay. Isn't that so weird? I just think it's so weird. No, because I think that's always like even with acting, like I feel like this like really super successful actors were like, I didn't even want to do it. Like it just like fell into my lap, and you're like, what? Like that's like all I ever wanted as a kid. Like, and you don't have to even work for it. But I feel like those things that we're like meant to do, they do just kind of like present themselves, and you just have to recognize it. So you were able to recognize it, which is like profound in and of itself. So tell us a little bit about like what it is exactly, like whether it's a one-on-one, because I know you do one-on-ones, you do workshops, you do corporate stuff, you speak. How do you decide, like, do you have a framework that you work through, or is there a specific, do you have different subjects? Like I know you talked a little bit about sexual trauma and also like transitions and all of that. So what, if we were to sign up for a workshop or something, like what happens in the workshop?
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so workshops usually are themed. So actually, a few days ago, I had a workshop and it was just on body love. And of course, I peppered in, you know, pleasure and all that good stuff. But like that was just focused on body/self love. I may do another workshop that's all about pleasure, like living a life full of pleasure. Usually for my one-on-one clients, so what I do is we have our sessions, and then in the interim, we also talk via like Voxer or WhatsApp or text, and that way I can kind of hold them through life. So one day
Mhm.
they might walk through the door and be like, I want to talk about dating. And then the next they might be like, oh my God, something's coming up sexually or something's coming up spiritually. So it's kind of like an open forum, but
Okay.
we do like, if that makes sense. But in the beginning of our work together, we have like goals, right? Of like, hey, I want to work through this thing around sex, or I want to work through this thing around dating. So I'm always like holding those overarching things. Like I come in being like, all right, today I think we're going to do this. We're going to do an exercise around this. But they might be like, that's great, Erica. Can we save that for next week? Because I have to talk to you about this. I'm like, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
great. So,
Yeah.
and how I like to work is I mix traditional, like more talk therapy with exercises with embodiment. So we might do exercises where we're like talking, we're speaking, but we also might do visualizations, meditations, exercises, and tools. So it's great because you leave a session kind of hitting all the different
Mm.
things, which is really fun.
Yeah. What are the top issues that people come to you for?
Love that. Oh my gosh, so good. Self-love for sure.
Okay.
Um, self-love's a big one.
Do they
Dating.
say that? Do they say like, I'm coming to you for self-love? Or is it
Yeah.
like,
Or that's so good. Usually no. It's like underneath the surface. So it's like
okay,
I'm coming for love, maybe pleasure. Love is usually the one that people can easily identify.
identify? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I want this person in my life, or this isn't going well. So it's like that's usually a gateway in. And then underneath, they're like, oh, like I'm not really treating myself with self-respect. Like we got once we start to like peel the layers, we start to see, oh, this is going on, or this is going on. So honestly, it's funny. I talk a lot about pleasure like in my like branding, you know, because I think it's
Mhm.
so important. It's a big part of my message. But usually folks do come for like love. I want to find my person. I want to find my person. And then we unpack so much. And the sexual piece is usually maybe a trauma, or I don't feel confident. I feel, you know, I gained weight. I feel embarrassed in the bedroom, or I don't even know what I like. So it's like there's all these different entry points, but usually, like I said, it usually is love, and then sex is behind it. And what's interesting is then pleasure is way behind. Living a pleasurable life is way behind all that, which I actually think is interesting to know. You know what I
Why?
mean? Because like, okay, because why I think this is so fascinating. I'm like, I should talk about this more is we don't think it's valuable
Hmm.
as a society. And so, and I talk about that a lot. Like we as a society value so many other things. We put pleasure on the back burner. And for me, what pleasure means is living a pleasurable life. So sure, we could talk about sexual, sensual, but what I mean is like, can we really enjoy our cup of tea? Can we really
Yeah.
enjoy the strings, you know, and the jazz quartet, whatever? And it's funny that people are like, I will go to you for love. I'll go to you for these like big things. But then it's like, oh, like we have so much conditioning around pleasure. And it's funny, again, going back to the marketing piece, like when I speak to folks, like pretend on an Instagram post, I really have to start to decondition why it's even a worthy cause to hire a coach that focuses on pleasure. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
people are like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, whatever. That's cool, but I don't really need that.
Hmm.
And so I'm glad you asked that because I think it speaks to us as humans that we're like, that's fine. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's fine. I
Well,
don't need it.
do you think that people like, do you think that it's also because people kind of have an idea of what they like? So it's like, I feel like that would be a hard sell. Like if I'm putting
Yeah.
myself in your shoes, because it's like, I could tell you what I like, but it's more about the allowing yourself, right? Allowing yourself to partake in it.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is connected to the self-love, which is
No
connected to
worthiness. Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. So that's
Yeah.
why it's so funny. I talk about pleasure a lot and people are like, that's really cool. Anyway, and even me, like, again, I've taught this stuff for years and pleasure is a thing. I mean, it's so deeply condition. We have so many conditions on it, right? We could look at pleasure. There's so many stories. It's lazy. It's an unworthy cause. It's disgusting, whatever. The list goes on and on.
Yeah.
And I've been teaching this for years, and I still have to be like, it's an intention that I have to kind of every day be like, okay, Erica, how am I going to bring more joy and play and pleasure into my life? Like I have to actively get there. So I understand from like, if we're talking like sales, I understand from like a sales perspective why someone's like, if I have money, it's all right. I don't need to invest in this, but I could take my money and invest in hopes to get my person, right? Which we'll talk about and we would do. But I understand from like you said, from a buyer's perspective of why is this worthy? Why is this a worthy cause? Right.
Yeah. Because it is. I mean, that's why people like go on vacation. That's why they spend all this money like searching for it without like allowing it to happen just in the everyday.
Exactly.
Which is then you wouldn't have to spend that much money on a vacation, or you could, whatever. But how does it tie into work? So
love that.
Yeah. I mean, obviously confidence does, if you're confident in your job, like all of that. But how would pleasure tie into how your career trajectory? I mean, like how could that influence it?
Yeah, pleasure is a great healing balm or antidote for burnout. So often I get to, corporate folks and they're like, I hate this. Like by the time I get to them, right? Like they're like, I hate this job or this job is okay. But like, I am so tapped out. I'm so burnt out. Like this sucks. You know what I mean? And often what's, we spend so much time at our place of work is that, and I really see this when I work one-to-one with folks is like, it's hard to be at a job where we feel so just burnt out or even just like, meh, like even kind of neutral, and then expect to close the laptop or close the computer or close whatever we're doing, close the door, and then for the rest of the evening have a pleasurable life. I mean, some people do, but it bleeds over, like right? Like a lot of clients are like, oh my God, I did not know how this is bleeding into my free time. And like, it's hard for me to like get into flow, get into pleasure, get into feeling good because like, it's hard. So why, and a part of the reason why I go to corporate is like, how can we make this sustainable? How can we make this feel a little bit better? Like, how can we approach it from that lens so it doesn't feel so soul sucking? You know what I mean? Like, so we can make it a little bit better, honestly.
And so you don't even get to the point of burnout, right? Like that's the key, is to not like, you don't want to work so hard that you will get burnt out and then you're doing like damage repair, right?
Exactly.
So what are some ways? I mean, if somebody is doing the thing, getting the stack and doing it, how can somebody start to incorporate something into their life to help mitigate burnout?
Yeah, so this can kind of be twofold. For me, that's why I love going into the corporate, because I work individually with folks, but I also kind of see collectively, holistically what's happening as an office. So someone might be practicing these things and then being like, I'm not supported, by my company. So for me, I'm like, okay, great. Like that's where I get to be my detective when I, like when I was a kid. So I get to go in and be like, okay, hi, like, if the C-suite or whatever, they're the management's like, okay, what's going wrong? I'm like, hey, like, let's holistically kind of fix what's going on. Like we need to, I go in there and we kind of talk about that. Like, how can we create a more thriving, healthy, sustainable environment? So that's one piece, right? But on the individual, if someone's like, great, my company's not going to do that, Erica. Like, what do I do? Great.
Yeah.
Right. Like, that's great. That's available, but that's not always available. So for me, I make sure that's where the pleasure work really is important. And the real self-care work, the real self-love work. Again, I always say pleasure. Sometimes people can use pleasure as a way to bypass and to avoid. And I'm like, no. Like we have to feel our feelings. We have to, like, for me, I really advocate like feeling what's going on, the truth of situations. We don't want to use this work to bypass or to override. And for me, how I like to use this work is like in the mundane. You know what I mean? So I teach people, okay, how can we bring more pleasure to something? Like, how do we bring pleasure to this job? So silly example is, okay, maybe I have 5 hours I have to do this report, and I'm noticing myself, I'm crunched over the computer. Ugh. Okay, we still have to do the report. I'm not saying pleasure, I'm going to be the pleasure fairy and, quit your job and, whatever. Like,
I know.
no,
Yeah.
I have to be real. Unfortunately, we have to pay our taxes. Like, we have to be humans of this society. If you so choose, you know what I mean? But like, that's most people are like, I choose to be in this reality. Right. So with that being said, we still have to do the 5 hours of that job you have to do. Okay, great. We're not taking that away. We're not changing the circumstances. My question I always have people that ask themselves over and over and over, I set a million alarms throughout the day, is how can I make this moment more pleasurable? So, okay, I still have to do this 5 hour thing. Maybe I roll back my shoulders. Maybe I take a deep breath. Maybe, you know what? I still have to get this done, but I'm going to quickly go make a cup of tea. As I do this, I'm going to put on jazz music. Okay, I can't do anymore. I'm going to take a lap around the office for 2 minutes. I just need to get up. Again, these are very simple. I think of them as like chiropractic alignments. Like they're simple. They're like baby cracks, like they're baby.
Yeah.
But so we often think, oh, I know that, I met with people like, oh, I know how to do that. I know that. I'm like, great. Do you practice that regularly and do you stack it? Because the power comes from no surprise here, but the power comes from consistency and stacking it. So that's great that you did 3 weeks ago. Genuinely, that's great that you did, take a walk 3 weeks ago. Ideally, we need to practice this daily.
Yeah.
Right. Like ideally, we need to be like, of course, I work here. I want to, lead from integrity. I want to be a great employee. And simultaneously, my intention is to take care of myself and make sure I'm nourished. How do both coexist? And that becomes our job. So I'm going to rock it as an employee. I'm going to be in integrity, do the best I can, while also making sure I'm listening to myself. Oh, I'm actually hungry. Wow, I actually really have to go to the bathroom. I was holding it for 30 minutes. Let me go take care of that. Like, does that make sense?
No.
So it's like,
yes.
Often I tell people this. They're like, that's so simple, Erica. That's so simple. I'm like, it is. Now let's practice it.
But like do it and see how it feels.
Exactly. See how it feels. See what changes. See, are we resistant to it? So it's like we all, and my teacher, the same teacher from before, would say pleasure, or we could say pleasure, self-care, fill in the blank, is the easiest thing to conceptually understand. Like we're all like, duh, but practicing it, living it as a practice, as a devotion, as a discipline can be one of the most challenging things to embody.
Yes.
Because our stories come up, so my invitation is great. We know you know this. How do we start to actually live it and embody it on a regular basis?
And I think having somebody give you 2 things, 1, permission, and 2, accountability, right?
Yes.
So if you have, I think it's either women, because we're just kind of conditioned to like keep it together, right? And like C-suite, like very, high level executives who also have to just keep it together, right? For their, employees, giving them that permission to just like take a moment, take a 2-minute walk. Like it doesn't have to be this like long hike, right? Or like you said, just going like unhunching your shoulders, doing all those things, like standing up, like, dude, get a standing desk. They're amazing. Like that'll change your thing, but just that permission is so, and it's going to sound so cliche, but it's so powerful. Like it really is, just to have somebody objective come in and be like, you're allowed to go get a cup of coffee in the middle of this thing. You're allowed to go pee, like go, like don't get a UTI. Like no one wants that, Yeah, that's a huge thing. And accountability, which is, I think, one of the best aspects of getting any kind of coach, like whatever coach you end up like gravitating towards, having that accountability is so key. I don't know if you feel the same, have you found that? Yeah.
I love that. I think that's, for me, that's why I have clients have access to me in between sessions, because the big thing, and I am like, this is to hold us accountable, or like have somewhere to report of like, I didn't do it. I'm like, it's okay, or I did it, celebrate me. And so I think that's like the accountability is so huge. It's so huge, especially in a taboo topic, right? Like, first of all, in anything, for me as a human, it's supportive to have accountability, to have someone holding me. But especially in a topic where there's so much conditioning and shame, we do need someone to be like, I got you. And like consistently reinforcing, like you said, the permission of like, no, this is good for you. I'm supporting you. Like we need that person in our corner. And again, that teacher that I brought up earlier, Regina, a big part of her work is community. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. But now I'm like, oh, as I am a teacher of this work, I'm like, it makes sense because again, there's so many stories. Like I said, there's so much conditioning around this. You do need community. You do need that coach to normalize this work.
Yeah. To recondition, right?
Exactly.
To have
yeah. Because at first that again, I said this before, but like I teach this work and I with ease put it on the back burner. With ease. And that's why for me, why I keep, I do have support. I have people that, coaches and community members that are like, hello, like, I know you want this. I'm like, thank you, because otherwise, if I was left up to my own devices, I would be like, that's okay. I don't need to do it,
Yeah. Well, it's like guilt. It's just, there's so much guilt laced in it, laced around it. Like even just like the thing that comes up for me, it's like, I teach a yoga class every Saturday. Right after my class, there's a sound bath. And I think I've stayed like once for it. And I'm like, I want to stay every time. Like I always want to stay for it, but I have 2 little kids and I'm like, I have to go back, even though we have someone come help my husband on Saturdays. But I'm always like, I should go back and see how they're doing. Like, they're fine. They're so happy. They're playing with someone else other than me. Like, they're ecstatic. Like, they're sick of me. But I'm always like, no, I should just go back. Like, that's too much for me. Like, I've already been away for an hour. And there's so much guilt. And it's so dumb. And I know that. But it's so, like you said, like, I cannot express enough how much conditioning plays a role in every decision we make, and having somebody to just point it out is so helpful. Like it's so helpful, and it does spill over into all the other facets of our life, especially your career, because like you said, usually you're doing your job wherever, if it's at home or at an office, for most of the time, right? Most of our waking hours are spent doing that. So having something that is going to affect your general well-being, right, has to affect your professional well-being, Right. Yeah.
Right.
So
exactly.
It's so cool, like what you're doing. One question that I have is what could the C-suite do? What could leaders in a corporation do? Like you mentioned, sometimes you'll go in and work with leaders and see how you can create a sustainable environment. What are ways that leaders could do that without like totally, bringing on a whole new, benefits program or something like that, like something easy that doesn't break the bank.
I love that. So I often, do things like I teach tools. So things like more celebrations. And honestly, I talk about like as a culture, as a company culture, what is our relationship to self-care? Because often, companies could say, we fight for mental health. We fight for, we advocate for that. And it's like, that's fabulous. Do you actually, like holistically, you know what I mean? Like how? I'm like, great. I love that we're saying it. I love that we're normalizing it. However, like, what does that actually look like? So we talk about like, what is our mental health care like? Like, what are conversations like? Like I said, I bring tools to the office and I have them incorporate that. So it's not just like, oh, this lady came in and she gave a talk and that's nice. You know what I mean? It's like, I really want to create that ripple change. So like I said, it is tools. It is also as a company deconstructing what we have around self-care, self-love, because we might say, oh, I love self-care. I love self-love. Everyone deserves that. We might say that from our brain. But from our, business brain, we might have scarcity. We might have stories wrapped up in that, right? Of like, oh, like what if someone actually does really self-care? Then like, will they not be as productive? Will that hurt our numbers? Like, you know what I mean? So it's like, we actually have to really decondition these tales. Yeah. Because someone can say, and that's great. Again, I advocate for self-care. I advocate for mental health. I advocate for humans being humans. But then when push comes to shove, those stories could still be so intertwined in the culture. And so part of my job, right, is like like how do we still create a thriving business, but also focusing on making sure the humans in that business are nourished and taken care of. So before I even honestly go in and here's tools that you can use during meetings, I really try to have a lot of conversations and work through a lot of the conditioning of, wait, hold on, like what's really going on here? And what do we really think? So we move some of those cobwebs so then we can easily implant those tools and actually use the tools. Because someone, again, might say, that was nice, but do we really want to do this? Like I have to kind of clean out the dirt. Like we got to clean through the cobwebs for us to then implement things that will stick, you know?
Yeah. How do you then keep those leaders accountable? Like how does an employee keep those leaders accountable? Like they know you're here, we're going to talk about well-being, we're going to talk about wellness, we're going to talk about self-love, and that's great. She comes in for a meeting. They say they're going to do this. It kind of lasts for about a week. How, if an employee is like, they're not doing it anymore, but I am entry level, like this is not, I don't have enough power or clout to bring this up with, the VP of HR. Like, what can they say without sounding like a whiny, little like woo child, which is fine. You could be a whiny little woo child, but how could they do that in a professional way?
I love that. I think that's actually so great that you even brought that up, because often I feel, I come to offices and by that time they've already like collapsed or into themselves, where they're like, it's fine, whatever, I'm going to abandon ship. So again, twofold is that's why for me, I really love meeting with people either one-to-one in a company or in smaller groups, because I want to make sure that even if everyone else abandoned ship, which is really heartbreaking, but if that does happen, they also have the resources to resource themselves. That does not, again, bypass of what the heck, guys? You know what I mean? Like that doesn't bypass, wait, this is like not cool. But first and foremost, I want to make sure that they have the tools that they're like, this stinks, but I could resource myself. So that's one. Part two is, I think you actually kind of asked it in the question, is like, we have like part of the self-love, part of the self-respect is advocating for ourselves. And I think it's like, okay, like, how do I do that? That's the question, is like, how do we do that in a professional manner? I think that is important. And for me, that's why I love meeting with everyone, to kind of hold each other accountable. You know what I mean? Because I don't want it to be like, oh, this person does it, this person, like, it's a community-wide thing. And again, it does take a lot of work, because first of all, we have tons of stories, we have tons of conditioning, but then we have layers of, is this even important at work? Is this even important? But for me, what I have seen, as you can guess, and as you've kind of alluded to before, like, oh my God, like it is so powerful seeing like companies enforce this, or not even enforce, but like practice this. It's amazing.
Support it.
So amazing. Exactly. Support it. And like, so I know I kind of danced around it, but what you said is exactly it. It's like, that actually is a beautiful place to be, that like, I have enough respect. Like that's a celebration that like, I got to a point where I'm noticing what happened here. So like, I want to advocate for myself. Like so the question becomes, how do I advocate for myself in a professional way?
Yeah. And also, I think that ties back into like little full circle, but I think it also ties back into just confidence, right? Like it just goes back to like, how do I find the confidence to bring this up with somebody who's more senior than me? Like, I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to sound, again, we had this like condition that like, stuff isn't as important as the spreadsheet, like, but so I'll give you a little example. Like if I'm a, relatively new employee, like fresh out of school, really excited, landed this great job, and my, uppers were saying that we're going to start this great new wellness thing. We're going to do like community, whatever. And it ends up like kind of fading. How could someone who's relatively new, a little bit more junior, like what are some things that person could do to just feel more confident in bringing it up?
I love that. So, I'm going to say this, and I know you know this, but I'm going to say this. It's when it's done from an aligned place, it's great. So we don't want to do it from a manipulative place. So I'm going to give that caveat. So it's called PCP, and it's praise, correct, praise. And it's essentially like a redirection sandwich. And so
I do
essentially
this with my children.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And so why I'm saying this is, if we reach out, pretend to the HR, the HR department, let's pretend praise. I'm so grateful that I had the privilege to, experience this. So often corporate offices don't do this. I'm so grateful. It's so fabulous. Correct. Correct might be like, I was curious, I'm making something up. I was curious.
Yeah.
How can we start to integrate or ask a question of like, I love what we learned. Can I take on that? Like, can I lead things, right? Like, so it shows our leadership. Like, can I, integrate a workshop once a month or like showing that. And then again, praise again, thank you so much. And again, it's not, we want to be mindful. It's not for manipulation, but it gives us a little confidence of we're genuinely praising. We're genuinely grateful. We have a question. We have a correction. And then we praise again. And I
love the leadership. I love that.
Right?
Like, because it kind of also shows initiative. It shows that you're committed to the company, like that you actually like care about it. I love that. I was just going to say like, can we do it again? But that's even better.
Yeah. And then it shows, first of all, like, hey, thank you so much. This is fabulous. Also, I'm willing to, like you said, the leadership, I'm willing to do this. It shows like interest, leadership, and then praise again, right? Like then we end with the praise. But I think you asked such a beautiful question too. It's like, that's why for me, the work is so important, one-to-one or continuing the confidence. So someone feels confident enough to do that.
Yeah.
That they're like, okay, I'm scared, but like, I really got something from that. I want to continue that. But that's just like a baby example of the PCP,
yeah, but I think that's such like a real world example too, because like I think we've all kind of been in a similar situation, whether it's about, implementing this cool, self-care regimen at your office or just anything like asking for a raise, asking for even just to get an interview for this job that you saw available, it's a little bit more senior than you, but like it all kind of circles back and it circles back to confidence and all the things that really like influence our confidence that we're not even aware of, which could be sexual, it could be, I mean, like just thinking back to like middle school and the first time you were like dumped or like those comments that people say to you that stick with you have an effect on your confidence as an adult. And that's okay. It's everybody. But I just see awareness is so, I think like awareness obviously is the first step, but I love what you're doing. I love that you're allowing people like to acknowledge it and to cultivate confidence in a really safe space. So I love that. Erica, is there anything else that we didn't like touch on that you wanted to kind of bring up or talk about a little bit?
I love it. I think you actually nailed it. I love what you said. Like, sadly, sometimes we think things are compartmentalized. Like, oh, sex is in this corner, dating is in this corner. And again, sometimes it's appropriate, right, to have it here, but everything bleeds into one, right? Like everything informs another. And like you said earlier, actually, it's like, especially with like these spiritual lessons, like we keep learning the same thing until we learn the lesson. You know what I mean? And like, it's just like, oh, it's back and it's back. And so it's like,
you too? I thought I was the only one.
Oh God. I'm like, not this again. I thought we did this. But, often like, again, take the, like you said, the sexual piece, the confidence piece, folks think, oh, I just need to work on my confidence and then I'll be a great dater or then I'll have a great relationship with money. It's like, I wish it was, I mean, I don't wish it was like this, but like it is all connected. Mm-hmm. And so if we're feeling a certain way somewhere, it's connected somewhere else. So that's why it's funny. People are like, they start working with me and they're like, wait, we're talking about money? Like, that's random. And I'm like, no, it's not. You know what I mean? Or, oh my God, we're talking about work or whatever. Like, yeah, I'm like, no, this is connected. So again, for the corporate conversation, if something's coming up in our lives, it does bleed over. Like if we don't have confidence, pretend in the bedroom, or we don't have confidence in dating, you might think, oh, but I'm so good in corporate. Yes. And it still sneaks its way through. And why I love this work is it gives us permission to go to the root of the thing and for us to heal it at the root. And so then it stops affecting money, corporate, this, that, like it really heals heals it all, which is fabulous. And so I wanted to say that because often we're like, let me just compartmentalize. It's fine. It's fine. It's like, it does.
Yeah.
It does bleed. And then the last thing I will say I think is important is fighting for our relationship to pleasure. Folks have different things. So for you, the word might be joy. For someone else, it might be play. For someone else, it might be pleasure. But for me, the core of my work, again, I kind of started this conversation is when it is my time, I want to look back at my life and say, wow, it was I was so alive. And that's my wish for everyone is like, I was so alive. Like I played with all the different crayons. I played with all the different textures. Like I lived. And that's the core of the work that I do. And so my permission to anyone from this conversation is asking ourselves, how can I really be more alive? And that for me, I tap into my aliveness through pleasure. So maybe for you it's play, maybe it's joy, but like, how can we integrate that into our life so we have the most fulfilling, rich, rewarding life that we could look back and say, that was fantastic. That was so amazing.
Yeah, there was this video, or I don't know where I saw it, but this woman was, she was dying and she was very, very old. And someone was like, asking her what her favorite memory was or something. And she just said, oh, it was all just so much fun.
Oh,
and I was like,
that.
I love that's that. What I want. That's kind of it, right? Like everyone's always like, what's my purpose? Like, that's it,
Yeah.
Erica, thank you so much. This was so fun. We are going to obviously include all of the things so people can reach out to you. But thank you so much. Do you want to do a little plug? Do you want to say anything?
Sure.
Okay, go for it.
Of course, I love it.
So the mic is yours.
Thank you. I'm big into, again, because I think this work, like we talked about, has so much conditioning and so many stories, and this work should be accessible for everyone. I really believe that this is for everyone. And so for me, I have a ton of free resources because I want everyone to have, if you're someone that likes to read a book, I have an ebook for you. If you're like, no, I want to listen, I have the podcast. I want to read a blog, I have that. Like, because I want people to feel like they have a step and they have tools and technology to begin their journey. So I have tons of free resources, and that's all on my website, which is www.wethelight.org. And if you want a little bit more and you're like, hold on, I want to like talk personally with you. Some folks, they're like, no, I never want to talk to you. I'm like, that's cool. Take the free things and run. And so if someone's like, wait, hold on, like, I want to talk more about this. I want to talk pleasure. I want to talk love. I want to talk about soul stuff, like whatever, something in this conversation resonated. Like so many coaches, I do have a free discovery call. What I call it is a free mojo makeover assessment. Cause like we talked about, right? Like, it's like, get our mojo back, get our fun back, get our play back. And that really is complimentary. That's 60 minutes, no strings attached. If we love each other, yes. And if we love each other, it's like, great, let's continue. If someone's like, I don't jam, or do you have a recommendation? Of course. Like, these are really no strings attached calls. But I only open a few up throughout the month because, as you could imagine, it's time consuming. So open a little up and then close the doors. So if something in this conversation resonated, I say, go, book it. Cause I only have a few available each month. And that's also on my website, wethelight.org. And that's the Mojo Makeover Assessment.
Amazing. Cool. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Erica Weiderluht from We the Light. And thank you so much. This was so amazing. I hope if you liked this episode, if you liked this conversation, please subscribe, please follow Resume Well on Spotify, iTunes, and now YouTube. And follow us on Instagram at Courtney Austin Page and at resume.careers. And we'll see you next week.